The Girl Who Became a Fish is a short story by Osamu Dazai that was originally published in 1933. Dazai is one of Japan's most famous authors. His book, No Longer Human, is one of the highest selling books in Japan's history, only contending for number one with Natsume's Kokoro. However, I will talk about Natsume in a later video. No Longer Human has become quite popular beyond Japan as well in recent years, exposing people to the sometimes unnerving and bleak perspective of its author. Desai was a man who went through a lot in his lifetime. He suffered from addiction and always felt isolated, and he was not unaware too of his harmful actions and their effects upon others. No Longer Human is not an autobiography, but it does reflect his life quite a lot. In one part of the book, Yozo Oba, the protagonist who is narrating the story through a diary, explains how he had become close to a woman and her daughter. But after the daughter refers to her previous father as her real dad, Oba loses hope that he will be fit for the family, and seeing this, his fear of humanity resurfaces. He then decides that he is not at all fit for this family, and believes leaving them would be the best action for them. This actually can be seen as Oba purposefully committing a virtuous action that is in his mind selfless by abandoning these people, of course, taking himself to be the burden. And of course, that is one of the strongest themes throughout Dazai's work, removing oneself from the world, from the burdens that come with it. In the book The Setting Sun, the main character's brother writes a letter to his sister before taking his own life. This brother figure, I believe, is a stand-in for Dazai. The character tells his sister, if a man has a right to live, doesn't he have a right to die? It's, of course, a haunting sentiment that makes me think about it even if I don't always want to. The book The Setting Sun was a post-war work and reflected a feeling of stagnation after the war's end. This and the feeling of being disconnected is combined when the main character reflects on a poem she read after the war's end. It said, "Last year, nothing happened. The year before, nothing happened. And the year before that, nothing happened." This statement may seem odd if one isn't familiar with Dazai, but when one comes to an understanding of Dazai, the statement becomes unsettling, or maybe completely true, or maybe you'll feel nothing about it. A lot had happened in those years, but in my interpretation, I believe the statement reflects a feeling of disconnecting from the world after being presented with so many terrible things. The near constant air raids, the conscription, the deaths of so many people, and then Desai, his own life, his abuse in childhood, his addictions he's faced, his failed relationships. Everything becomes a blur in the world, and there's no more confronting it as it becomes too much to handle. Eventually, after cutting ties with the world and with the emotions surrounding it, life starts to feel like nothing. So what if a war devastated the country? How can we trust that another one won't come soon? Humanity is fraught with difficulties, and once one realizes that it is a never-ending issue, soon nothing is news, nothing is happening. However, Desai's fascination with suicide and isolation did not come about through the war. It is reflected in his earlier writings as well. In his 1939 novella Schoolgirl, we follow, well, a schoolgirl throughout her entire day. In this story, we are never allowed to leave the thoughts of this girl. There are no breaks, no parts, no chapters. We go through an entire day, meaning we don't have to just sit through the actions these characters take, but the aftermath as well. The feeling of isolation never leaves, as we are never given a break from the narrative. No time jumps or anything. And what's more is we hear the thoughts of this character, and many of them reveal the malice she has, on top of her sadness. However, her malice is very human, and something anyone reading can understand or relate to. One of her fears, or confessions, is that she states she is capable of committing a great many terrible acts. While never actually said, this line remains haunting, because every human is capable of terrible things, and how can we trust ourselves not to fall into that? However, her mind continues down another tangent of thought until she forgets about the previous declaration. And honestly, isn't this how we deal with most terrible thoughts and ideas? By ignoring them and focusing our attention on something else? Going back further, there is an amazing book, The Flowers of Buffoonery from 1935. This is actually the introduction of the character Yozo Oba to the literary world, before the expanded version of his life in No Longer Human. The Flowers of Buffoonery focus on the hospital stay of Yozo Oba, after his first attempt at ending his life. He had jumped off a cliff with a woman. He had survived, the woman didn't. However, this book is extremely comical. Dazai breaks the narrative almost constantly to complain about how terrible his own writing is, or voice how difficult of a time he is having in creating the characters, and asks the audience to understand. This has made this book one of my favorites, but back to the writings. In this book, Dazai himself interrupts some of the characters' more joyful interactions, asking us to understand how Oba can enjoy his downtime, despite the loss of a life that he was part of. The book then ends very abruptly, with Dazai telling us he has nothing more for the story, as if he himself finds the work is useless, or in other words, meaningless, as if this storm of complex feelings has no endpoint, and can't even be taken seriously after a certain point. It is just a never-ending struggle. Hence, the narrative of the story cannot be wrapped up in any satisfying way, because it is built completely against that. Now let's jump back another step earlier. In 1933, The Girl Who Became a Fish would be published. I believe this short story perfectly captures the world of Dazai. It is beautifully written and captures human emotion naturally. At the same time, it shows Dazai's aversion for society and was typically held in high regard. He is a unique writer because he wants to reveal an emotional truth in his stories that are usually pushed to the side. He wants to explore uncomfortable ideas because these things are present in our world, and ignoring them may only make the issues worse. So, what am I talking about? Let's look at the story. The story follows a 13-year-old girl named Suwa. She lives with her father in a very poor town in northern Honshu. Her father works long, grueling days, and there's barely enough money to survive off of. Suwa's father makes her work the summer months selling or attempting to sell refreshments to tourists at the waterfall, the only place in town notable enough for people to visit. One day she witnesses a boy fall from one of the cliffs and land in the water. The boy dies, and Suwa is permanently scarred by witnessing this event. No one ever brings this up again in the story. As mentioned, Suwa only has her father in her life. Suwa is left, as a child, to contend with these emotions all on her own. Her father is distant, and one detail the story makes clear is that when he does have extra money, it usually turns into alcohol. Suwa has no one to turn to in her life, but she remembers the story she was once told, one about two brothers. One of the brothers had become insatiably hungry and ate all the food they had. He then found his thirst unquenchable and headed to the village well. He drinks all the water there and then heads to the river. At that point, scales begin emerging on his body, and he turns into a serpent. His brother finds him in the state and is distraught, but the two brothers can never reunite. One now lives in the water, the other on land. There was nothing they could do. I imagine the story was to speak on how unchecked greed can break ties, causing relationships to fall apart. It is a cautionary tale not to overtake and to be aware of other people. Suwa, however, interprets the story differently. Where one was supposed to see tragedy, she sees escape. The brother's transition into a serpent is meant to be a terrifying prospect, but Suwa wants it. And this is what makes Osamu Dazai to me. He has taken what society has considered to be the greatest punishment, being removed from it, and then tells us that it is actually the greatest reward. Or at least, shows us why one would think that, truly respecting the emotions of somebody who has that belief. What makes the world so great? The book asks. Take Suwa's life. No one in the town even so much as interacts with her. And where has the world left her? She lives in complete poverty, and she has no one but a distant father, her father, who neglects her feelings because he sees them as being just that of a growing girl. So when she decides to leave the world and become a serpent herself, it is cathartic and presented as being a justifiable action. Now, I'm sure it isn't difficult to piece together what the metaphor is here. The copy of this book I have describes itself as an anti-coming-of-age story, and I couldn't agree more with that statement after reading it. Most stories detailing a significant event in a young child's life will describe them overcoming it or finding a way to live, while this book details how difficult living actually is, and that sometimes the world actually fails us. Though it isn't said directly, the young boy's death weighs heavily on Suwa's mind, and that is seen through her actions. Not knowing what to do with her emotions, she releases them at the only person she can, her father. yelling at him that she hates them. She's really crying for help, and it goes unanswered, dismissed, and not taken seriously. That's when she decides to jump into the water and become a serpent. Her wish comes true, but she is only a carp. However, she celebrates finally being free from the burden of her father and the world around her. She is no longer expected to do anything or be anything, so she jumps again into the same pool the boy had lost his life in, and disappears. Though not stated, it is implied slightly that she was friends with the boy, and when losing her only friend, she wants to go after him. Sua's eyes are not filled with any hope for the future, nor any excuses for the present. In one part of the book, she asks her father what he is living for. She is angered that he doesn't have any real answer to this question, but it is a hard question to answer. Sua knows that year after year she will be doing the same thing, stuck in the same life, and that boy will never resurface from the water. Instead of ignoring the hardships of life or trying to excuse them as part of a bigger journey, Dazai drags us right up to it and refuses to let us look away, to understand that these hardships aren't just roadblocks in life, but our life itself. This is why the girl who became a fish is so haunting, yet intriguing. Like all Desai's works, he goes into the darkest depths of humanity where many others refuse to go. His masterful writing too brings us into this feeling of isolation, being trapped in one's own mind, where every other human seems to disappear and be nothing but a distant dream. This is a short story, but a good part of it is dedicated to a night where Sua has to sleep alone at her house since her father is away in town. This section of the book perfectly encapsulates the feeling of isolation from a child's point of view, one I am sure anyone can relate to, especially in how unsettling it is framed. We are told that there are mountain men in the forest and that they can be heard all night. Along with this, Sua feels that someone keeps looking into the house and then leaving. I don't really know how to describe this, but I believe it reflects how differently the world feels as a child, how things aren't so put in place and benign like we see things as an adult. Everything is mysterious, and when left alone, unnerving. But it is left up to interpretation, and you can feel whatever you want to feel about it. This book reflects how external factors can impact our lives so much, and how our own emotions are not actually under our control. When these emotions are bottled up and we are left secluded with no one to talk to, they can have devastating consequences. The mountain hut that Sua lives in is completely isolated, and I believe that reflects how Dazai felt in his own life, even if he wasn't actually living in the most secluded area in the country. He felt that way, and I'm sure many of us feel that our own room feels like this hut, cut off from everybody. However, one hopeful thing about Dazai's works, which I believe may make them more helpful than destructive, is how he presents all these emotions straight up. Without skirting around them, he has revealed to the entire world that you are not alone. Other people suffer trapped in their own minds, and maybe with some empathy, we can come to understand other people and ourselves. Then we can make those connections that we need to live and get through this together.